The first indication that something was profoundly wrong came not from a distress signal, but from its absence. The research colony designated Twilight Garden, home to 217 beings from 14 different species, stopped responding to routine check-ins at 0600 Standard Galactic Time on the morning of the 34th cycle. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Communication arrays failed, solar weather interfered, administrative oversights occurred. What made the silence strange was everything else that continued. Power consumption remained steady, environmental systems cycled normally, automated reports transmitted on schedule, atmospheric composition nominal, structural integrity intact, food production optimal. Every mechanical system aboard the orbital platform functioned exactly as designed. It was the life within that had gone quiet. By hour 18, the Galactic Mediation Council dispatched the scientific vessel Threshold to investigate. By hour 36, when Dr. Rashen Corvallis first stepped through the airlock into Twilight Garden's central habitation ring, she understood immediately that what they were facing had no name in any medical database she knew. The lights were on, the air was warm, recycled to perfect specification. Soft music still played from someone's quarters, an Alderani meditation chant, looping endlessly. And in the central commons, 37 beings sat or stood in perfect stillness. Their eyes were open, their chests rose and fell with steady breath. But there was no one behind those eyes. No flicker of recognition, no startled reflex when Corvallis approached. A Vadrian crystalline form stood near a viewing port, one limb extended toward the stars, frozen mid-reach. A human technician sat at a table, fork halfway to his mouth, the food on the plate grown cold hours ago. Life signs? Corvallis asked quietly into her comm, though she already knew the answer. All nominal, doctor, came the response from the threshold. Cardiovascular function normal across all species present. Brain activity detected. No pathogens, no toxins, no radiation exposure outside expected parameters. Corvallis moved through the commons slowly, methodically checking each unresponsive colonist. Pupils responded to light, skin responded to touch with appropriate temperature. But when she gently guided one individual to sit, they remained in whatever position she left them, joints loose, cooperative, empty. They're not dead, she said aloud, more to herself than her team. Behind her, engineer Tariq Amondi emerged from a maintenance corridor, his dark face creased with confusion. Doc, you're gonna think this sounds stupid, but something's wrong with the quiet. Corvallis turned. Explain. Tariq gestured around the commons. I've worked on 70, maybe 80 stations in my career. You know what they all have in common? Noise. Not loud noise, human noise. People hum when they work. They tap their fingers. They breathe different when they're concentrating versus when they're relaxed. Stations have a rhythm, you know. He walked toward the frozen technician with the fork. This place doesn't have that. It's got mechanical sounds, ventilation, recycling, equipment, but it's missing the layer underneath, the organic noise. It's like walking through a movie set. Everything looks right, but your brain knows it's wrong because the sound designer forgot to add the human ambient track. Corvallis felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Tariq was right. She'd been so focused on medical observations that she hadn't registered the uncanny quality of the silence. These weren't people who had stopped. They were people who had been removed, leaving only the biological machinery running on automatic. Get Captain Andrade, she said, and find me Arbitrator Thune. Whatever this is, it's not medical, at least not in any way I understand. Within 8 hours, the threshold had catalogued all 217 colonists. Every single one showed the same condition, biologically functional, neurologically active, but utterly unresponsive to external stimuli. They could be moved, positioned, fed through IV lines when their bodies required it, but they initiated nothing, responded to nothing. In the Threshold's medical bay, Dr. Corvallis stood over neural imaging displays with Dr. Marcus Way, a neuroscience specialist who'd been pulled from a nearby research vessel. The scans showed something that made both doctors deeply uncomfortable. The brain activity isn't damaged, Way said, his finger tracing patterns of light across the holographic display. It's reorganized. Look here, the normal patterns of self-referential thought, the default mode network that maintains sense of identity. It's like it's trying to process across a much wider field than the physical brain. Trying to, Corvallis asked. The activity is still there, but it's not coherent anymore. It's like imagine a radio trying to tune into a frequency that's much broader than it was designed to receive. The signal is there, but it's scattered across so much bandwidth that it can't form coherent information. Corvallis stared at the scans. You're saying their consciousness is trying to exist somewhere other than their brains. I'm saying their brains are acting like they believe consciousness exists somewhere else, and they're trying to reach it. Way looked up at her. The question is, what made them believe that? And where do they think they are? Before Corvallis could respond, Arbitrator Kellis Thune entered the medical bay, their crystalline form refracting the lab's lights into prismatic patterns across the walls. The Vadrian moved with the slow deliberation of a being that processed information through resonance rather than linear thought. Dr. Corvallis, I have reviewed all data transmitted from the colony. I wish to share a concern. Thune's voice emerged as harmonics, translated through a vocoder into Galactic Standard. 16 years ago, I mediated a dispute involving mining rights near a spatial anomaly designated Dead Zone Epsilon. During those proceedings, a Lyth archivist referenced a historical incident of consciousness displacement that occurred near similar anomalies. When I attempted to access Council records on this incident, I found the files sealed under Elder Authority protocols. Corvallis felt her stomach tighten. Someone buried this. Someone classified it at the highest level, Thune corrected, which suggests either extreme danger or extreme embarrassment to the Council's authority. The Vadrian's form pulsed with a frequency that Corvallis had learned indicated concern. I have requested the presence of Archivist Mira Quellin, a Leth specialist in suppressed historical records. She arrives within the hour. Wei looked between them. If this has happened before, why isn't there a protocol? Why isn't there treatment? Perhaps, Thune said quietly, because there was no one left to treat. Archivist Mira Quellin materialized in the briefing room as a holographic projection, her physical form still in transit aboard a Council courier ship. The Lith appeared humanoid in basic structure, but her skin held the translucent quality of deep water, and when she moved, faint trails of bioluminescence followed like memory traces. Her species experienced consciousness partially as a communal field, individual minds that could voluntarily merge and separate, sharing memory and thought like breathing. Dr. Corvallis, Arbitrator Thune. Her voice carried harmonics that suggested she was speaking for more than just herself. Other Lith minds contributed to her words through their shared memory network. I have accessed the buried records. What you face is not unprecedented. It is merely unspoken. She gestured, and the holographic display filled with fragments of ancient text, images of abandoned stations, testimony transcripts marked with council seals 6 centuries old. In the 214th epoch, a Lith philosophical commune established itself near what we now call the Veil Expanse. 47 individuals. They sought to explore the nature of collective consciousness, to push the boundaries of mental communion. Quellin's luminescence dimmed. After 6 months, contact was lost. When investigators arrived, they found all 47 alive, breathing, present, but empty. Their minds had reached for something beyond themselves and never returned. What caused it? Corvallis asked. The investigators detected what they termed presence radiation, an exotic emission from a subspace membrane rupture. The theory, hastily suppressed by the Council, was that consciousness exists as a fundamental field in certain dimensional layers. In our universe, it fragments into individuals. In that layer, it remains unified, omnipresent, environmental. Wei leaned forward. You're describing consciousness as a dimension rather than an emergent property. I am describing what the investigators theorized before their research was classified and they were reassigned to distant posts. Quellin's form flickered with what might have been anger or grief. The Lith have always known we touch something larger when we commune. We assumed it was simply the sum of our individual minds, but the investigators suggested we were briefly accessing the membrane between layers, a controlled partial exposure. The commune pushed too far, and their minds attempted full integration with the omnipresent field. Why suppress this? Thune asked. Because it suggested consciousness could be externalized, transferred, potentially controlled or harvested by any species that learned the mechanism. Quellin's image stabilized, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. And because the Council's elder species had encountered such technology before, in ruins they prefer not to discuss. They knew what this represented. Corvallis felt the implications settle over her like cold water. How many ruptures are there? The record shows 16 confirmed incidents over 600 years, all classified, all quarantined. In every case, the affected individuals remained catatonic until biological death. No recovery, no treatment. The ruptures were sealed using technology the Council claims does not exist. Claims. Thune's harmonics sharpened. Elder Authority maintains we do not possess dimensional manipulation capabilities. Yet the ruptures were sealed. By someone. Using something. Quellin's form pulsed with barely contained frustration, an emotion intensified by the multiple minds she carried. I am risking censure by sharing this with you, but 217 lives are at stake. If the Council intends to follow historical protocol, they will not attempt rescue. They will quarantine Twilight Garden indefinitely, and let nature take its course. That's murder, Wei said flatly. That, Quellin replied, is containment.
Captain Yusuf Andrade stood on the bridge of the military escort ship Karen, watching the long-range sensors track an approaching council vessel. 40 years in the fleet had taught him to read political wind as well as stellar currents, and the wind from the council was blowing cold. "They're not sending a rescue team," his tactical officer observed. "That's a containment frigate. Medical designation, but the weapon systems are live." Andrade nodded slowly. "Get me a secure channel to Dr. Corvallis. Not through council relays. Use the commercial network, encrypted." When Corvallis's face appeared on his personal display, she looked exhausted but alert. "Captain, tell me you have good news. I have an incoming council ship that's configured for quarantine enforcement, not rescue. What have you learned?" She briefed him quickly. The membrane rupture, the suppressed history, the lack of any successful treatment protocol. As she spoke, Andrade pulled up tactical projections, calculating response times and interception vectors. "They're going to seal the station," he said when she finished. "Full quarantine. Maybe with us inside if we don't move fast. We can't leave these people." "I know." Andrade looked at the tactical display. "But we need leverage, something that makes us too valuable to quarantine." "What do you have?" Corvallis hesitated, then made a decision. "Send me your medical staff's exposure logs. Everyone who's been aboard Twilight Garden or in direct contact with affected individuals." "Why?" "Because I think I see a pattern." 30 minutes later, Corvallis stood in the Threshold's conference room with a holographic display showing exposure times and symptom onset for every crew member who'd entered the colony. Beside her, Tariq, Wei, Arbitrator Thun, and Captain Andrade's hologram watched as she highlighted the data. "Look at the progression," she said. Vadrian crew members who spent 40 minutes aboard began showing early signs: reduced responsiveness, delayed reaction times. Alderani crew at 55 minutes, Lith at just 20 minutes, which makes sense given their naturally communal consciousness architecture. "And humans?" Andrade asked. Corvallis highlighted 3 names in green. Tariq spent 4 hours aboard doing systems analysis. Dr. Wei spent 6 hours conducting neural scans in direct proximity to affected individuals. "I've been there for 8 hours, cumulative. All 3 of us are showing minimal symptoms. Slight processing delays, occasional sense of presence, but nothing approaching catatonia." "Why?" Wei asked. "I don't know, but the pattern is consistent. Humans are resisting the effect 3 to 4 times longer than any other species on record." Thun's crystalline form pulsed with rapid frequencies, their equivalent of racing thoughts. "This would explain why there are no human colonies in the historical records of rupture incidents. Your species achieved interstellar capability recently, after the most recent rupture 80 years ago, which means we've never been tested like this before," Andrade said. "And now we're the only ones who can operate in the affected zone for extended periods." Corvallis nodded. "If we're going to attempt any kind of rescue, it has to be us." "Attempt with what?" Tariq asked. "You said there's no treatment protocol." "There isn't. But we've been thinking about this wrong." Corvallis pulled up the neural imaging again. "We've been treating this as an invasion or an infection. Something attacking the mind. But Quellen was right. This is the mind trying to reach something that feels natural, even welcoming. The victims aren't trapped. They're seeking. They want to merge with the presence field." We stood up slowly. "So we don't pull them back. We disrupt the merge. Make individuality more attractive than dissolution." "How?" Andrade asked. Corvallis turned to them, and in her eyes was the terrible light of an idea that might work or might kill everyone involved. "We do what humans do best. We make noise." 17 hours before the council containment ship would arrive, Dr. Corvallis assembled a team of 6 humans in the Threshold's briefing room. Tariq was there, along with Wei, 3 medical technicians who'd volunteered, and a young cognitive specialist named Sarah Okafor, who'd been studying human consciousness architecture for her dissertation. "I need to explain what I'm asking you to do," Corvallis said, "and why I think it might work." She brought up the neural imaging again. "Human consciousness is uniquely fragmented. We experience constant internal dialogue, competing voices, contradictory impulses, emotional conflicts we process simultaneously. Other species have more unified cognitive structures. Even the Lith, who share consciousness communally, maintain coherent individual identity within the network. We're messier," Tariq said. "Evolutionarily, yes, and that messiness, that noise, is what's protecting us." She displayed a comparative analysis. When a Vadrian mind encounters the presence field, it experiences something harmonious, a resonance that feels like completion. For a Lith, it feels like coming home to the ultimate commune. But for humans, it feels like drowning in someone else's thoughts, Sarah finished. I've felt it. The last time I was aboard the colony, there was this pressure, like being in a room with too many people all talking at once. But the voices were inside my head. It was invasive. Wrong. Exactly, Corvallis said. Your mind rejected it because human consciousness isn't designed for unity. We're too contradictory, too self-argumentative. We maintain identity through internal conflict, not internal harmony. We lean forward. You want us to use that as a weapon. I want us to use it as an anchor. Corvallis's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her tension. If we can maintain our fragmented, noisy human consciousness in close proximity to the affected colonists, we might create enough cognitive dissonance to disrupt their merge attempts. Think of it as forcing them to hear an argument they can't ignore, making individuality loud enough to compete with dissolution. That's an untested theory, one of the medical technicians said quietly. It is, Corvallis agreed, and it might not work, or it might only work partially. Or we might succumb to the field ourselves before we can save anyone. I need you to understand. This is the definition of experimental intervention. Tarek stood. When do we start? You're sure? Andrade's hologram asked. Captain, I've spent my whole life feeling like my brain was too loud. All that internal arguing, second-guessing, contradicting myself. I thought it was a flaw. Tarek smiled without humor. Turns out it might be evolution's way of keeping us individuals. Yeah, I'm sure. One by one the others stood. We need a protocol, Wei said. If we're going in, we need structure, ways to maintain our cognitive noise, intensify it if necessary. Sarah pulled up a cognitive framework. Internal debate exercises. Force yourself to argue both sides of any proposition. Recall conflicting memories, times you felt two ways about the same thing. Recite poetry or song lyrics that have complex, contradictory emotional content. Anything that makes your internal experience dense, layered, resistant to simplification. How long can we maintain that? One of the technicians asked. No idea, Corvallis said honestly. Until we can't. But every minute we buy might pull someone back. Arbitrator Thune entered the briefing room, their crystalline form refracting light into somber colors. The council ship has transmitted its intentions. Twilight Garden will be sealed within 16 hours. No personnel will be permitted aboard after that time. They have declared the station a permanent quarantine zone. Then we have 16 hours, Andrade said. Doctor, get your team aboard. I'll position the cairn to delay the council ship if necessary. Buy you whatever time I can. Corvallis looked at her team, 6 humans about to walk into a dimensional trap, armed with nothing but their own contradictory minds. Let's go make some noise, she said. The interior of Twilight Garden felt different now that Corvallis understood what she was facing. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of something vast and patient, and utterly alien to the concept of individuality. Her team spread through the central commons, each taking position near clusters of catatonic colonists. The protocol was simple: maintain close proximity, maintain internal cognitive noise, and watch for any sign of response. Corvallis knelt beside a young Alderani female who'd been a botanist, according to colony records. The woman's eyes were open, fixed on something beyond physical sight. My name is Shen Corvallis, she began speaking aloud, a technique Sarah had suggested. I'm a doctor. I'm here because I failed someone once, a patient I couldn't save because I wasn't bold enough to try an experimental treatment. I've questioned that decision every day for 11 years. Part of me knows I made the right call based on available evidence. Part of me hates myself for cowardice. Both things are true. Both things define me. As she spoke, Corvallis felt it. The pressure Sarah had described, like standing in a room that was simultaneously too crowded and infinitely empty. A presence that wanted her to stop being separate, to release the exhausting maintenance of self, and merge into something vast and peaceful. It would be so easy, so restful. No, she said aloud, forcing her attention back to the internal argument. I am Shen Corvallis. I contain contradictions. I hold paradoxes. I am multiple voices that will never harmonize, and that's what makes me real. The Alderani woman's finger twitched. It was tiny, perhaps just a muscle spasm, but Corvallis felt her heart spike with hope. That's right. Come back. Come back to the noise, and the conflict, and the beautiful mess of being singular. Across the commons, Tarek was pacing between 3 frozen Vadrians, talking rapidly. And the thing about engineering is you're always wrong and right at the same time. The solution you design is elegant and terrible. It works, but it could work better. You love it and you hate it. Every project is an argument you have with yourself about whether good enough is good enough, and the answer is always both yes and no. One of the Vadrian's crystalline form shifted slightly. a harmonic ripple passing through their structure. "Yes," Tarek shouted. "That's it. Come argue with me, tell me I'm wrong. Be individual enough to disagree." Wei was using a different technique, reciting contradictory philosophical positions in rapid succession, creating a density of competing ideas. Sarah was singing complex polyphonic songs where the melody argued with itself, and slowly, incrementally, the colonists began to return. A hand moved, an eye tracked, a breath deepened into something approaching voluntary control. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Corvallis felt the presence pushing back, not with hostility but with seductive invitation. Parts of her mind were reaching toward it, seeking the peace of dissolution. She could feel her internal voices beginning to harmonize, the contradictions smoothing out. "No," she gasped, forcing herself to recall every failure, every regret, every moment of self-doubt and self-contradiction. "I am fragments. I am conflict. I am..." The pressure intensified. 6 hours into the intervention, the team had managed to partially restore 23 colonists. But the toll was visible. Wei had collapsed twice, overwhelmed by the presence, brought back only by Tarek physically shaking him and shouting contradictions into his face. Sarah's nose was bleeding, whether from physical strain or neural stress, no one knew, and the presence was learning. Corvallis felt it adapting, finding the edges of human resistance, probing for weaknesses. It wasn't malicious. That would have been easier to fight. It was simply vast, patient, offering an end to loneliness that was almost unbearable to refuse. "We're losing coherence," Wei gasped, his voice slurred. "It's learning how we work. Adapting." "How many more?" Tarek asked, his hands shaking. 19-4, still catatonic. Corvallis said, "We're not going to make it." That's when Archivist Mira Quellin walked through the airlock. Her physical form finally arrived, carried the translucent luminescence of all Lith, but her movements were deliberate, purposeful. Behind her, Arbitrator Thorn's crystalline form reflected lights like captured stars. "You should not be here," Corvallis said. "Your species is the most vulnerable to this effect." "I know," Quellin replied quietly. "That is precisely why I must be here." "I don't understand." The Lith archivist moved to the center of the commons, and her bioluminescence began to pulse in complex patterns. "You are using human resistance as disruption, forcing individuality through cognitive noise. But you are trying to pull people back one at a time, fighting the presence's gravity with individual strength." She turned to face Corvallis. "I can do something you cannot. I can meet the presence on its own terms, as communal consciousness. But I can maintain the structure of individuality within communion. I can become a bridge." Thun's harmonics rose in pitch. "Alarm. Quellin, you will be absorbed. Your individual matrix will dissolve." "Perhaps," the Leth said softly. "But my people have always understood that sometimes one mind must dissolve, so that many can remain distinct. That is the price of communion. Someone must hold the boundaries." Corvallis understood what Quellin was proposing, and the horror of it made her voice harsh. "You're offering to merge with the presence as a buffer, to use your consciousness as a barrier between it and them." "I am offering to be the argument," Quellin corrected. "A single voice that maintains individuality while touching the universal. A proof that both states can coexist. If I can hold that position even briefly, it will create a resonance that your human noise can amplify." "You'll die," Wei said flatly. "I will transform," Quellin replied. "Which I was always going to do eventually. All Leth dissolve into the communion when we age. I am simply choosing the timing and purpose." Before anyone could stop her, Archivist Mira Quellin closed her eyes and stopped resisting. Her bioluminescence exploded into brilliant patterns as her consciousness reached toward the presence field with deliberate intent. But unlike the colonists who'd been passively overwhelmed, Quellin dove in as an active participant, a cognitive architect building structure within chaos. The effect was immediate. Every colonist in the commons jerked simultaneously, as if struck by lightning. The presence field, which had been formless and overwhelming, suddenly had geometry boundaries and gradients that hadn't existed before. Quellin was mapping it from within, creating pathways back to individuality. "Now," she shouted, her voice already becoming multiple harmonics. "Amplify the pattern, make them hear the path home." The human team responded instantly, intensifying their cognitive noise, but now it had structure, following the pathways Quellin was carving through the presence. It was like she'd built a scaffolding that their fragmented consciousness could climb. Colonists began waking in waves, gasping, crying out, returning to bodies they'd half forgotten. A Vadrian crystalline form vibrated with coherent patterns again, and Alderani's eyes focused and tracked. A human technician sat up and vomited, then laughed hysterically. But Quellin's bioluminescence was fading, her form becoming translucent, ephemeral. "I can hold it." Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, already more than individual. "Seal the rupture. I will maintain the boundary until her physical form collapsed." Empty. Captain Andrade made the call to the Council containment ship,
with the cold authority of someone who'd spent 40 years making impossible decisions. Council Vessel Adjudication. This is Captain Yusuf Andrade of Earth Alliance Ship Cairn. We have 187 recovered colonists, 13 lost, and 1 individual maintaining active stabilization of your dimensional rupture. You will deploy your suppressed sealing technology immediately, or I will broadcast full documentation of your classified rupture protocols across every open commercial network in the sector. The silence that followed lasted exactly 11 seconds. Then Councillor Pravesh's face appeared on the display, ancient and cold. Captain Andrade, you are threatening the Council with information you should not possess. Arbitrator Thune provided full legal standing for my knowledge acquisition under Mediation Council authority, which supersedes Elder authority in active rescue scenarios. Your suppression violated standing galactic humanitarian law. Andrade leaned
forward. But I don't care about legal arguments right now. A Lithe archivist is dying to hold your rupture stable. You have technology that can seal it. Use it, or explain to every spacefaring species why you let 217 beings die to protect your secret. Another pause. Then, without acknowledgement, the adjudication deployed a device that looked like condensed starlight. It launched toward Twilight Garden, and where it made contact with the station, space itself seemed to ripple and seal, like skin closing over a wound. The pressure vanished. Corvallis felt it disappear so suddenly she almost fell. Around her, the rescued colonists were weeping, arguing with each other, embracing gloriously, beautifully individual again. But in the center of the commons, Archivist Mira Quellen's empty form lay translucent and still, her consciousness dispersed into the structure she'd built to save them. Corvallis knelt beside her, and though she knew the lith was gone, she whispered, "Thank you for holding the boundaries." In the silence that followed, she could almost hear multiple voices answer, a communion of one who'd chosen to fragment so that others could remain whole. 3 months after what became known as the Twilight Garden incident, Dr. Shen Corvallis stood in the Galactic Mediation Council's Hall of Testimony. The chamber was ancient, built by species long ascended or extinct, and it had never been intended to hold an assembly this large. Representatives from 43 species filled the seats. Human delegation included Corvallis, Captain Andrade, and Commander Wilson from Earth Alliance Intelligence. Arbitrator Thune stood as mediator, and in the center, a holographic memorial displayed the names of those lost 13 colonists and 1 archivist. Councillor Pravesh, representing the Elder Authority, spoke with the weight of centuries. The Council acknowledges the loss of Archivist Mira Quellen as a sacrifice in service of galactic stability. The Twilight Garden rupture has been sealed. Dimensional monitoring protocols are being expanded. "That's not why we're here," Corvallis said, her voice carrying through the chamber's acoustics. "We're here because you've been lying for 600 years. There have been 16 ruptures. You had the technology to seal them, and chose not to develop response protocols. You let people die to protect your political advantage." The chamber erupted. Species that had lost expeditions in dead zones demanded answers. Others called for Elder Authority dissolution. Pravesh raised a hand, and silence gradually returned. The technology for dimensional sealing is dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could destabilize reality itself. The Council has always balanced knowledge preservation against catastrophic risk. And who decides what hands are wrong? Andrade asked. You, based on what authority? Your age, based on proven stability? Pravesh replied coldly. Humanity has been spacefaring for less than a century. You cannot comprehend the dangers we have managed on your behalf. That's when Thune spoke, their harmonics filling the chamber with resonant authority. Then allow me, as representative of a species with 12,000 years of Council membership, to state clearly, the Elder Authority's position is no longer tenable. Twilight Garden proved that newer species possess capabilities the old paradigm did not predict. Human consciousness architecture provided resistance we could not match. Lith communion protocols enabled intervention we could not conceive. The galaxy has evolved beyond your classifications. The Vadrian turned to address the full assembly. I propose the formation of a new institution, the Dimensional Monitoring Network, multi-species, independent of Elder Authority, tasked with detecting, analyzing, and responding to membrane ruptures before they claim lives, and the sealing technology, someone asked from the assembly, will be shared with all member species under strict ethical protocols, developed collectively, not imposed from above. Thune's crystalline form pulsed with determination. The age of managed ignorance is over. We face these threats together, or we face them ineffectively. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming. Only the 3 founding species abstained. The Dimensional Monitoring Network was established with headquarters on a newly constructed station called Quellen's Threshold, named for the archivist who'd proven that individuality and communion could coexist at a price. And humanity, the noisy newcomers with their contradictory minds and fragmented consciousness, were appointed to the core team not as subordinates but as essential infrastructure, because sometimes the galaxy needed voices that refused to harmonize. Shen Corvallis stood at the observation deck of Quellen's Threshold 6 months after its dedication, watching as ships from 70 species came and went, scientists, engineers, consciousness researchers, all working on the problem that had been hidden for centuries. Tarek joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a human vice he'd introduced to 11 alien species now. "You think Quellen knew," he asked, "that sacrificing herself would force the Council's hand?" "I think," Quellebelis said slowly, "she understood better than any of us that consciousness is always a balance between self and other, and that sometimes one individual has to become the bridge so others can cross safely." Heavy stuff for a Thursday. Corvallis smiled. "It's Tuesday. See, that's what I love about humanity. We can contemplate dimensional consciousness theory and still get the days wrong. We're philosophically profound idiots. That's what keeps us individual," Corvallis agreed. "We're too messy to merge cleanly." Below them, a new team was preparing to investigate another potential rupture site, this one detected early, before any colonies had been established nearby. The team included 2 humans, a Lith, a Vadrian, and 3 species Corvallis had never worked with before, all trained in the protocols they'd developed from Twilight Garden, all prepared to anchor consciousness against dissolution if necessary. Captain Andrade's voice came through on the observation deck's comm. "Doctor, we're picking up some unusual readings from Sector 447 Gamma. Not a full rupture, but fluctuations. The kind that might indicate membrane instability. Dispatch a survey team," Corvallis replied. "Full consciousness monitoring protocols. I want to know about it before it becomes critical." "Already underway. Andrade out." Tarek watched the monitoring displays. "You know what's funny? For the first time in galactic history, the question isn't what are we, it's what are we protecting? Our contradictions, our noise, our refusal to dissolve into something neater. Turns out that's not a bug. It's a feature that cost Quellen her life, a feature she chose to preserve," Tarek corrected gently. "Big difference." Corvallis nodded, her reflection ghostly in the observation window. Somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, consciousness existed as both wave and particle, both individual and universal, and humanity, fractured, contradictory, impossibly noisy humanity, had become the anchors holding the line between them, not because humans were superior, but because human minds had evolved in isolation, conflict, and internal argument, and that very imperfection made them uniquely suited for a role no one had anticipated. They were fragments that refused to be unified. They were noise that would not be silenced. And across the expanding galaxy, where consciousness could blur and dissolve in ways no one had fully understood until Twilight Garden, that stubborn, messy individuality was exactly what was needed. Dr. Corvallis turned from the window, ready to review the latest rupture data. Behind her, stars wheeled in the silence of space, a silence that was never truly empty, but full of presence, waiting. And humanity, alongside their allies, would make sure that no one ever had to face that presence alone again. If you've made it this far into the silence and the noise, consider staying with us. There are more boundaries to explore, more membranes between what we are and what we might become. Next time we'll investigate what was found at the coordinates Quellen marked in her final transmission, a structure that predates the Council by millennia, and a question that rewrites everything we thought we understood about consciousness itself. Until then, remember, you are fragments. You contain contradictions. You are multiple voices that will never fully harmonize, and that more than anything is what makes you real.